without further ado, let's go ahead and continue on with the second segment where we talk about Brandon Ingram and some potential destinations that he could end up in. So, one team that I feel like could acquire Brandon Ingram is the Miami Heat. We were just talking about the Miami Heat. We were talking about how Jimmy Butler has there's a chance, there's a question bubbling around whether or not Jimmy's going to get traded. There's also the thought that Jimmy Butler is just not going to be a Miami Heat anymore after this season. And the Heat are going to be in search of another small forward to try and sort of fill in that role that Jimmy Butler had on the team, whether it be the role of a leader, whether it be the role of a scorer, something. They're going to try to fill in that role after Jimmy leaves. So even if Butler remains on Miami beyond the summer of 2025, it's probably fair to expect the face of the franchise to soon pass someone else, presumably to Bam Adebayo. So Butler is going to turn 36 at the start of the 2025 to 2026 season. And all of that really suggests the Heat could be in the market for a new small forward, because why would you want to continue having a small forward that is that old? Unless his name is LeBron, I don't know why you'd want to have a small forward that's 36 years old. But aside from that, I mean, not saying that Jimmy Butler wouldn't be good as a 36-year-old. However, it is like not everyone in the NBA is going to be able to keep the same amount of consistency for as long as LeBron was able to do, because we're not entirely sure if Jimmy Butler's even going to be the same player that he was either going into this season or going into the next season, especially since he came off of an injury. So, of course, Ingram isn't really on track to be the next Jimmy Butler. Like, there's no real hype around him for that. But there's Miami could reasonably talk itself into Jacquez Jr. and Tyler Hero replacing their current superstar. So, while I don't think that it'll be that as impactful as having Jimmy on Miami, I do think that Miami is a pretty good spot for Brandon Ingram, and a spot that he should consider. Another spot that Brandon Ingram should also consider playing for is the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the idea that Ingram joins Cleveland seems like it was like a huge rumor that was going to happen, because Jake Fisher reported on Yahoo Sports that Cleveland held extreme interest in Ingram, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if, depending on how the season goes, Cleveland decides to move along some of their players to make space for Brandon Ingram. So Cleveland has two redundancies within its starting five. Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland should probably both be lead playmakers, but they're also both small. So playing them together makes defense a lot more difficult, and you can turn the offense into something more of a your turn, my turn thing. Then on the other side of the lineup, the Cavs are essentially starting two centers, barring some of the rapid and dramatic development of Evan Mobley's jumper, which has been improving. Playing him alongside Jarrett Allen can lead to a cramped offensive system with slightly less positional versatility on the other end. Essentially, you're going to mess up your spacing with that. And a trade involving the former pairing, barring New Orleans' inclusion of players other than Ingram, probably doesn't make much sense. The Pelicans already have DeJounte and CJ McCollum and a bunch of wings to cram into their rotation. It'd be hard to find the right role for Garland there if they were to trade for either one of those guards. And Mitchell is honestly just way too good to be in this discussion. So if Ingram and Allen swapped, because honestly that might seem like a pretty decent move, because the Pelicans are in search of a center that can play defense, and Jarrett Allen would fit in that role pretty well. And if you put Ingram on that roster, then the scoring could definitely increase as opposed to having Jarrett Allen on the roster. And if you set aside Ingram's next contract for a moment, something that Cleveland doesn't really have the luxury tax to do, a far short-term deal that moves, it would bump Mobley to his more natural position at the 5, and would be able to create much better spacing for the rest of the guards like Donovan Mitchell and Garland if this lineup were to be paired up together. But that's just my opinion. Next team on this list is the San Antonio Spurs. Now, this is another situation where Ingram would probably arrive as a second or a third option behind Victor Wembanyama, and it's a little easier to find much more logical trades as well as reason to sign extensions with San Antonio. And they're good salary cap. They have good salary, and one of which is attached to a center for Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson, and Zach Collins, who would likely leapfrog Yves Mezzi and Daniel Theis on New Orleans. Since Victor Wembanyama is on his rookie deal and Devin Vassell signed for less than the max, San Antonio might be able to justify slightly overpaying Ingram for the next 2 or 3 years in order to get him onto the roster. Now, in terms of a fit, maybe it's not ideal with Ingram potentially taking some of the possessions away from Wemby, Vassell, or Chris Paul, but it would give the Spurs a consistent 20-point-per-game scorer, which would really take a lot of pressure off of somebody like Victor Wembanyama. And the last team that could be in the talks of acquiring Brandon Ingram is the Brooklyn Nets. Now, this might just be a little bit of optimism from me. Now, this might just be like a little bit of just, me hoping, but the Nets, they have a lot of picks. They can engage in a lot of trades. They can move a lot of players if they need to. And Nick Claxton is a quality starting center as well, something that New Orleans simply does not have right now. And he might actually be a good enough fit to get the Pelicans to attach some draft capital to Ingram to make this deal happen. So spacing should be an issue for a Claxton-Zion, front court, but a lineup with those two, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and DeJounte Murray, could really have defenses in shambles. Now, for Brooklyn's perspective, this would be about simply continuing the teardown that began by trading Mikal Bridges and reacquiring control of their own 2025 first-round pick. The Nets are in asset accumulation mode, so turning Claxton into a pick alone would be justifiable, and they wouldn't really have to talk themselves into extending or even re-signing Ingram. Having his expiring contract come off of the books next summer would give them more flexibility as they build around whoever comes along the next few drafts. So really, they're just trying to build. The idea would be to try to build for the future, and Ingram would be the number one option for that future. Adding Ingram alone obviously isn't going to lead to a ton of wins, but if the Brooklyn Nets are able to acquire Cooper Flagg, who knows? But that's all that I have on this second segment. So now we will go ahead and go into the third segment where I talk about James Worthy and his opinions on Kevin Durant being in the GOAT conversation. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.